On today's show, I am joined by Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, as well as the Game Theory podcast, to talk all about the 2024 NBA draft and, of course, the Hawks sitting at the top of that class. This is part 1 of 2. It's coming to you right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1722 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you just before Memorial Day weekend here in Atlanta. And today's podcast will be diving into the NBA draft with my friend Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, who also appears regularly on the Game Theory podcast alongside my guy, Sam Bassini. We're talking all things NBA draft on today's podcast. And I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out anywhere you might find your podcast and search Locked On Hawks on YouTube or Apple, Spotify. We're also on Overcast, etc. And I definitely want to thank you for listening to the podcast, as I always do. And also remind you at the top of this show, it's actually part 1 of 2 with Bryce and myself. We'll have plenty of NBA draft talk, so stay tuned for part 2. It should be available in your podcast feed of choice right away after you listen to part 1. So that's the disclaimer. And without any further delay, here we go with myself and Bryce and the NBA draft. I am joined now by Bryce Simon. Bryce, how are you?
What's up, Brad? How are you doing?
I'm good. I appreciate you doing this. It's 'tis the season. I know you're very busy, both with Pistons coverage and also dealing with our mutual friend Sam, who works you to the bone. These 3-hour live streams, man. You guys get going on those things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I realized what I was signing up for with some of this stuff. I was like, okay, hour and a half, once a week. Now it's turned into 2-3 times a week. I thought it was just going to be NBA draft. We actually talk way more general NBA than what I anticipated. So it's kept me on my toes. I enjoy it. I'm honored that he asked me to replace Adam whenever that all happened, but it's a lot of work. That's definitely part of it.
Yeah, I give Sam grief every once in a while about just how long some of the shows are. Just I like it, but I have, just to pull the curtain back a little bit, these Locked On podcasts, they don't let us go super long. Like if we do, we have to chop up into parts and do all that stuff. So it's just the opposite experience. Which everybody's doing their own thing.
I record. I haven't as much recently because things got busy, but I did a lot with Koo over on Locked On Pistons, who does an awesome job. And I'm pretty sure the Locked On people, I will be shocked if they don't say something to you like, don't bring that guy back on. Because I'm pretty sure every time I recorded with Koo, they were like 30 minutes, 40 minutes max, and we'd be at like 50 or something like that. So yeah,
I basically plan to just do 2-part episodes now. Like whenever I have guests on, I just go. I'm like, we're gonna go an hour. I know we're gonna go an hour. If we don't, it's fine. But if we don't, it is what it is. Anyway. I'll stop rambling. We'll talk about the draft. Obviously, the Hawks have the number 1 pick. That changed things a lot for me. You've had, not necessarily you're covering the Hawks every day, but you cover the draft all the time. It's been a week plus since they won the lottery. It was not a team that anybody expected to win the lottery, right? They were 3% chance. We all know kind of the deal with this draft in general about this. It's kind of not. It's pretty wide open, we'll say, at least compared to some other drafts. Did that change at all for you, knowing that the Hawks had that pick, or are you narrowing your scope at all, given that slot for them?
No, I don't think much changed for me in terms of who I have as the number 1 prospect on my board, and I feel pretty confident that that's who the number 1 player in the draft is right now. I think for the Hawks, it comes down to what their plans are with some of their roster. I think that's where the Hawks makes this really, really interesting, because there are some guys that you could take at number 1. And what does that mean for other people on the roster, right? So we'll talk about all these guys, but if they draft Alex Sarr, what does that mean for Capella? What does that mean for Okongwu? If they know they're going to move on from Trey or DeJounte, do you look at one of these guards? Stephon Castle's been saying, I'm a point guard as we go through this process. Nikola Topic is one of my top 2 or 3 players on the board. They have some interesting wings in Atlanta. That's another thing I want to get your perspective on as we talk through this. How do they feel about the Kobe Buffkins and the AJ Griffins, and what's Sadiq Bey's future coming off the ACL? So all of those different things play into that. And it's important in this draft because this tier is very wide open, Brad. And it's not Victor, no matter what, regardless of what your roster says.
Yeah, for sure. And I was honestly preparing to do more of the what does this mean for X player stuff when they were picking 10. I went, and I had this month of like, all right, they're picking probably 10 or 11. We'll see if it goes. Maybe they'll jump in the top 4. Even when there was that 2 minutes where they got in the top 4, I'm thinking, all right, 3 or 4. one of those things. I'm like, oh, they got one. Interesting. So yeah, they have a lot of dominoes and very few sacred cows, I guess the way you put that, like on this roster. I think until I hear otherwise, Trey's still in that category, but they could move on from Trey. We don't know the answer to that. I think Jalen Johnson's the only guy that's written in like highlighter, like he's not going anywhere anytime soon on the whole roster, that's just a different place to be for a team that, while the Hawks weren't great the last couple of years, they're in a much better roster spot than most of these teams that pick number one overall. They have a lot more guys that they like, and they've been trying to win the last couple of years. So it adds a lot of uncertainty, I think is the way to put it, more often than not. And I mean, you didn't even mention, like, it's a very long list. This is kind of an unfair question to you, but I've been trying to tell Hawks fans who I think not everyone has settled on Alex Sarr, who we'll get into in a second, but the consensus, I would say, among Hawks fans is like, just take Alex Sarr. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I am just trying to say, hey, guys, it's really early in the process. Even as you and I talk, we're still a month plus from the draft, and this is a team that was not prepared to win the lottery. I mean, that sounds more derogatory than I mean it, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure. Landry Fields had that look in his eye, like, whoa, I wasn't supposed to be here at the end of the lottery. So I've been just trying to say, guys, like, don't get married to one player, because this is a front office that doesn't have a long track record of what they want. I don't have the best read on them still, and they could take 6, 7, 8 guys. I mean, this is probably, again, unfair. How big of a range would it be for the Hawks to announce their pick in a month and you not fall out of your chair? You know what I mean? Like, how many guys would it be?
I think it would go to 6. So I'll give the names that for just my personal board, and this will change for others: Alex Sarr, Nikola Topic, Zaccharie Risacher, Ron Holland, Stephon Castle, Donovan Clingan. I even have guys like Dalton Connect, Reed Shepard, Matas Buzelis. For some people, you could throw in Cody Williams and Rob Dillingham. I don't look at like Connect, Shepard, Buzelis as potential number one picks. I think they're in a relatively same tier, but those guys are more, like for the Pistons now, Connect is a guy that's in play at 5. I think if the Pistons had number 1, I don't think he's in play there. And that's because at 1, at the end of the day, if I'm going to take like a true wing, I'm taking Risacher over a Dalton Connect or Matas Buzelis or something like that. So I only really need one of those guys. But, if you told me the Hawks fell in love with Clingan over Alex Sarr for whatever reason, I wouldn't agree with it, but I would understand it. Topic, listen, a month or so ago, I think I did a mock where the Pistons had the number 1 pick. I took Zaccharie Risacher over Alex Sarr. At the time, Risacher was shooting like 43, 44 something % from 3. It's tailed off, but he's still right about 40% and just had a 28-point outburst in the playoffs. So if you told me the Hawks front office fell in love with Risacher and his fit next to Jalen Johnson, that wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, for sure. I think that's about what I think too, as far as range is concerned. And it would shock me a little if they went in the Reed Shepard, Rob Dillingham direction, just given where they are in this roster. Even if you say they're going to trade Trey, I'll be surprised if they trade Trey and DeJounte. I think that and if you're going to draft Rob Dillingham, it's kind of has to be his show at number 1 overall. Reed is a different category altogether, but he feels like and I mean this in the best possible way, he's a supporting player. He's not going to be a primary, I don't think, on a good team. Maybe I'll be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong.
I agree with that. I don't see Reed as like a primary on-ball guy or like the upside of that type of player, where I think like with Rob Dillingham, like that's swing for if Atlanta really wants to rebuild, trade, Trey, DeJounte, you really believe in Rob Dillingham, give him the ball and go with it from there.
This show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for a small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the roles you have available, and that's why LinkedIn Jobs is a fantastic option for you. They have the tools that you're looking for to find the right professionals for your team. They help you do it faster, and they help you to do it for free. I'm really been on the hunt for people to hire in my day job for several times in the past for years now. And the folks at LinkedIn Jobs have been huge in making the entire process easier and much more efficient for me. Then with small businesses, they're also wearing a ton of different hats. You might not have the time or resources that you need to perfectly hire someone. And they are not just another job board, though, at LinkedIn Jobs. They have a network of more than 1 billion professionals. That makes it the best possible place to find someone to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else, and they do it all, making the process easy and intuitive for you. Hiring is so much easier when you have that many qualified candidates available for your roles. So easy, in fact, that 86% of businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. They're also finding ways to make the process easier for you at LinkedIn Jobs, and 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn Jobs for hiring purposes. Post your job for free by going to linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Terms and conditions apply. So you gave your list of 6. The only other guy that I have been trying to, I think Modest might be 7.
Sure. That's
like
probably
he's
true.
the one for me where and again, this is not Hawks intel yet because we're so early, but I've seen people that I trust have him in that top 3 range, something like that. Or you might see him at 10. I'm not. The range is wide on almost all of these guys, other than maybe Sarr. Everybody else's range is like pretty wide.
Yep.
But he's the other guy that I might throw in there. Like I wouldn't be terribly shocked if they were just like, he seems like kind of a Quinn Snyder player. Like I think that kind of stuff too. I mean, Risacher versus Modest is a pretty interesting 1-2 combination. So that's lots of preamble, but I think we're on the same page there. I think we're also on the same page with number 1 overall, but I don't want to assume that. I think from listening to you with Sam, but let's just start here. Who do you have at the top of your board right now? And is that the same player that the Hawks should take? Because that's not always the same in this draft.
No, it's definitely not the same. I would say for the majority of teams, there's 30 teams in the league. I'm sure I could find a handful where I would say, you know what, like Topic makes more sense, or Risacher makes more sense, or something like that. But Alex Sarr has essentially been at the top of my board throughout this entire process as I've really gotten into it. I'll tell you, Brad, when I first started doing my surface level stuff back, almost 10, 11 months ago, whenever last year's draft was over, I started looking at this year's class. Sarr was the guy that jumped off the page to me immediately. I was like, why are people not talking about this kid more? And the consistency and some of the flashes were incredible. This is the archetype of big that you need in this era of the NBA. And for those who don't know, Alex Sarr played in the Overtime Elite program, but really the 2 players we knew coming out of that last year were the twins. The only people, really talked about were Sarr and Amin. So a lot of people actually, Dillingham played in the OTE as well. Tyler Smith, another guy, plays for the Ignite this year. So Sarr goes over to the NBL, plays with Perth, a team, a professional league, historic franchise over there, doesn't play a ton of minutes, but is impactful in the minutes he has. And so he's been on my top of my board through most of the process. Risacher was right there, as I just mentioned earlier, but right now Sarr is ahead of everybody else. And even for the Atlanta Hawks, assuming, Brad, that they're willing to move on from Clint Capella, there's a market for Clint Capella, or, I want the minutes to be there, I guess is my point.
Yeah. And there's this interesting thing about Clint and even Onyeka, who is this smaller guy, but he's a center. They view him as a center. He's flashed to the 4 a little bit alongside Capella, but that was almost more out of necessity. And I know, I'm sure you're not surprised, but there's always people that always want to put him at the 4 because of just the height. It's just simply he's 6'8", and it's like, well, he's a 4. Well, no, he's actually a 5. But they have these 2 guys, and it's been this back and forth for, I don't want to say 4 years, but we're getting up to 3 years now of the Okongwu versus Capella thing. And then you throw in this guy in Sarr, who there's a split there too of like, is he a center? Is he a 4? Is he both? That's another conversation to be had. But you're right. I think that independent of whether they draft Sarr, they already had this decision to make it center. They were already doing that anyway. And then now you throw this, and then also Clingan, same thing. Sure. Although Clingan would be even more of a decision because Clingan is just a center, whereas Sarr is a little bit more versatile. What stands out to you is like why you have him above the rest, like skill wise? I know obviously his calling card is probably his length and defensive versatility and all that stuff. But what sort of is your favorite stuff about Alex Sarr?
So I want to be clear about something. When we talk about this class, and I'm sure all of your listeners know this is quote unquote a weak class. I'm sure they've already all been told of all the years to get the number 1 pick to go from number 10. This is the wrong year to do it. Like I get all of that. And I think where that is the most true is at the top, unfortunately, there is no Victor. There's no Cade Cunningham from a few years ago when the Pistons, there may be the level of player, but right now as prospects, Sam Vecini talks about it all the time. He has no tier 1 or tier 2 prospects in this class right now. So when we're talking about Alex Sarr and any of these other guys we get into, you have to understand there's going to be flaws. Like there's going to be more than he may not quote unquote look like a number 1 pick. But with Sarr, why I have just kept him above others for the most part is the archetype. As I mentioned earlier, you talk about a 7-footer with versatility, athleticism, mobility, covers ground defensively. And I think he's going to be able to really do that from day one. And then on the other end, and this is where the flashes come in, a potential guy that can space the floor, stretch it, attack a closeout, those type of things. I kind of comp him to Evan Mobley right now in terms of, now Mobley's obviously way better, but in terms of Mobley's this really good, impactful defender, a little bit. Is he a 4? Is he a 5? And the offensive game leaves a little bit to be desired at times, as opposed to Chet Holmgren, who we know is at least going to space the floor on the offensive end, or Victor, who's just another category. But I think for me, Brad, it truly is just kind of the archetype, and my belief that if you can get that archetype of big, that is a cheat code in today's NBA. Almost every team other than the Nuggets, who have Jokic, are looking for this type of big to, put on their team. And it just opens up so many things.
Yeah. And this is a Hawks team that, and at number 1 overall, I know we all talked about this to some degree, but you kind of just take the best player, but also fit wise. I mean, you don't want to draft for fit number 1 overall. It's more of a tiebreaker. It's like, if you have these guys rated close, the fit matters more. But obviously this is a team that's been defensively starved for a few years now, and he wouldn't fix all of that by himself. But you mentioned Mobley. That's been a popular comparison. I definitely see that too. Adding that kind of defender to the mix here, especially, honestly, even more so if you're going to build with Trey, in my opinion, you want that guy that can do so many different things for you, whether he becomes the full-time 5 anchor or if he's playing next to a center sometimes. No matter what that is, having a defender like that, especially when you already have Jalen Johnson, who's got this range, and you can start picturing these lineups where you're suddenly huge in the front court if you want to be, and length, but also not just big to be big and versatile, big and athletic, big and rangy. It's something the Hawks haven't had in a long, long time. Like they've never really had that. So I've been trying to push back a little bit, just like not to gas him up too much. You know what I mean? I want to, if they end up taking him, it's like, I don't want people to think he's going to be coming in as Evan Mobley, because that's not, at least, year 3 or year 4 Evan Mobley. But I kind of see that as the pathway. I guess the other side we have to say is, like, why isn't he a tier 1 or tier 2 guy in Sam's parlance or whatever? Because of what you just said. That player you just described sounds awesome. So what is the risk there for someone who hasn't seen him play a lot?
I mean, at the end of the day, he still has to get stronger. He doesn't necessarily rebound the heck out of the ball on the defensive end. And a lot of the offensive stuff is theoretical as opposed to practical or consistent. And that's one reason why I am much higher. I don't want to say I am higher on him than a lot of people, just in terms of overall as a prospect. Most people have him number 1, but like, I'm a little bit more sold on it because I'm buying the offensive skill, and like it is, but I will admit it's flashes. Like it's like, man, that was smooth. That looked really good. The jumper looked good there, all of those things. And here's the other thing. He needs the skill level to come, because he isn't, like, I'm sure Hawks fans will think, oh, well, he can replace Capella as this pick and roll lob threat. That's not what Alex Sarr does best. He's not the most twitchy rim gravity type of player. And so if he doesn't develop the jump shot where he can pick and pop, ghost and pop, those type of things, well, then he's not going to be elite like Derek Lively coming in and catching all of these lobs and those type of things. So he's a guy that needs that skill to hit for him to be an overall two-way player.
Yeah, there's something I was going to ask you is, like, what if it doesn't work kind of thing? Like certain aspects of, I tend to be a practical person, which some people think is being negative. And it's like, that's not really the case. Yeah. But it's like, all right, so thought process is like, okay, they take Alex Sarr. How doesn't it work? And you mentioned the rebounding. That's my prime. Defensively, that's about the only thing I'm worried about. At least the closest only thing I'm worried about is defensively. If he's going to be your center, you're going to need some help on the glass, I think, at least early in his career. Mobley isn't a great rebounder. To the Mobley count, not a great rebounder either. Same sort of thing. Now, Jalen Johnson, awesome rebounder. That definitely helps. That's kind of been the theory of the Johnson and Okongwu front court, to not go super deep in the Hawks stuff, but Okongwu has similar issues as a defensive rebounder to Sarr. But offensively, that is where my concern probably is what does the primary role look like on offense, especially if he's not playing center. If he's playing center, I agree with you. I don't love the just pure, like, especially on a team with Trae Young, let's say. There's been a lot of line it up and play pick and roll with Trae Young, tons of lobs. He's arguably the best lob thrower in the league. Like, a lot of that stuff, even dating back to Dwayne Dedman and Alex Len and Damian Jones, like guys who are not great players, Trae made look good doing that. Sarr doesn't really do as much of that. And then if you're playing him more at the 4, does the skill stuff really have to pop at that point? Because that way you're playing him next to, theoretically, maybe you find a perfect center next to him. Maybe it's a Okongwu, whatever you want to say. you still need you need shooting. You need something else to go well for you if he's not playing center full time.
And that's why every one of these guys we're going to talk about over the next how many ever minutes, we're going to come up with flaws that people are going to go, oh man, well, that makes me a little bit nervous. Where it's either going to be floor spacing or feel for the game or defense, every single one of these guys. And people, well, that's every class. Like, we didn't have these type of concerns with Victor. I mean, listen, like all three guys in last year's class would be the top 3 prospects. Like when I look at this class, I've said for a few months now, if you took even the average of what a top 3 guys in a class would look like and put them at the top of this class, like if you bumped everybody down 3 spots, everybody would love this class so much more. Like like if you're talking about Alex Sarr at 4, people are ecstatic. You're talking about like what? Let's see. I have Dalton Connect at 7, who has major defensive issues. He's older, those type of things. But if you're talking about him at 10, a guy who just got crazy buckets in the SEC, you're like, okay, I can live with that. This class just doesn't have those guys at the top. And so I think if I'm the Hawks, I'm just taking the upside on the archetype of a guy who just completely changes things if he does space the floor, because then you can play him at the 4 or 5. And I will say, when we did our immediate mock, Sam loves the idea of Okongwu and Alex Sarr playing together at times, actually.
Yeah, I do too. The only question I have there is, and immediately I got a wave, as you might imagine, of people asking me, can the Hawks play Jalen Johnson, Alex Sarr, and Okongwu together?
Sure.
And my answer was yes, but is that a primary look that you want to go to? I don't know, because I think of Jalen as more of a 4. He can play. Sure. He can probably play some 3 in the future, all that stuff. And I'm not going to make you go into super Hawks land on this show, but that's more of a look than like a every down starting lineup for forever kind of thing for me, anyway. But you're right. I do think that, to Sam's point and your point, like I think Okongwu next to Sarr, especially early in his career, having a guy who has a skill level at center, not a big stiff. I'm actually very high on Capella compared to everybody else. I'm sure Hawks fans are laughing as they hear this, but Capella is not the center you would want next to Alex Sarr playing the 4. That's not because the skill level there, the lack of spacing, all those things. And one of the big decisions, I mean, I don't think you have to believe that Sarr is a center to draft him number 1, but I'd like to know what the Hawks think of him as positions are overrated sometimes, but especially that one, you kind of need to be confident in your evaluation. Like, can he be maybe in 2 years, 3 years, our full-time 5, or are we signing up for this full-time thing of him being more of the hybrid big? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's team building wise, you kind of have to have a pretty good idea about that.
No, because if he is the guy you're going to build around with whoever, whether it's DeJounte or Trey, and then I'm with you on Jalen Johnson. I thought he had an incredible year. He was so much fun to watch.
And they love him.
Yeah, as they should.
Yeah.
Is if you think that's going to be your 5-man and he doesn't rebound very well, well, then you got to build out somebody, I think it's Winhurst, it says like a 1-3-1 kind of roster.
That's his Cavs thing that he always does.
Roster construction thing. So let's say it's Trey, Jalen's one of the 3, and then Sarr. Well, 2 of those other 3 guys, if Sarr's not going to defensive rebound, they need to rebound also, because Trey's not going to go rebound.
Nope.
You just said Jalen does, but if Sarr doesn't do it at a great level, Brad, Oklahoma City Thunder have to figure this out. Like they have a very similar thing in terms of the 1-3-1 stuff with SGA. They got the 3 wings, guard, however you want to classify him, and then Chet. Well, Chet's not an elite rebounder, so you got to get elite rebounding from those wings, forwards, whatever you want to refer to them as. And so the Hawks would have to know that and get the right guys in place at their wing forward positions.
Today's show is brought to you by the folks at BetterHelp, and we carry around things that create stress, whether it's big or small in our lives. When we keep these bottled up, it actually starts to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and also figure out how to work through things, whatever that happens to be weighing you down at that point in time. Therapy is helpful for everybody. You can actually learn positive coping skills and help you better actually set boundaries for yourself. Therapy also empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for people that actually have major trauma in their lives. I know I have my own stresses that comes to work and future, etc. And we can also benefit from getting things off our chest with the folks at BetterHelp. If you're thinking about starting therapy, at any point, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and convenient to your schedule. BetterHelp, it's even suited to your schedule all the way through, which is huge. You're trying to navigate a time crunch like I often am. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest right now with the folks at BetterHelp. And the place to go is betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. The place to go, once again, is BetterHelp. That's better, H-E-L-P, betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. I do want to make sure we get to other guys, so we'll do that now. We'll probably come back to Sarr at some point. I've actually gotten a lot. This is not where I was planning to go, but I've gotten a lot of questions in the last few days, in particular, about Donovan Clingan, and he is also a big. There's a split on him. I think that I'm sure you noticed as much as I did. Around the time of the NCAA tournament, he went from being kind of in that like 8 to 10 range for a lot of people to that like 2 to 4 range from a lot of people. And he played very well. He was awesome there. He is a much more traditional prospect. He's a center only, defensively monster, all that stuff. But it's just people just ask me questions like, would the Hawks do this? And I won't say no to that. But it's a very different evaluation than Alex Sarr. They're both bigs. They're very, very different players. And I wonder if you think like he would look at a place number 1 overall, because I think in a regular class he probably would. But in this draft, all the things we already said, it's pretty open. Like, is that a reasonable consideration? And what do you make of Donovan Clingan?
I mean, I guess so. It's hard for me to say no, because I think there's a world where these two guys go 1-2. Like, if you told me that Sarr goes 1 and the Wizards take Clingan 2, I would not be shocked. Clingan more went from end of the lottery to middle of the lottery for me. And part of the NCAA tournament run was the minutes. One of the first things I have in my notes on his scout is, as a freshman, people loved him, but he didn't play a ton of minutes because they had Adama Sanogo. And then he comes back this year. There's an injury preseason. They kind of slowly ramp him up. And I wanted to see him play big minutes and how effective he could be in big minutes. So he would be interesting for the Hawks, because I don't think you like plug him into a starting lineup day 1. That's where he doesn't look like a number 1 pick, or maybe even the number 7 overall pick. Like, you get a little bit later into the lottery and you don't expect a guy to start from day 1. Even if you start him, I don't think he's playing more than 20, 24 minutes, which is fine for a rookie. Like, that's okay. Sure. But I don't think he's holding up for more than that. Really good defensive prospect. I think one thing, and I don't know, like, how, I'm not a Hawks expert. I obviously watch games, but Trae Young's getting doubled. Donovan Clingan is a guy that can pass. Like, I think it's one of the more underrated aspects of his game. So if defenses are putting 2 on Trae and Donovan needs to short roll and then make the reads out of that, he's not putting it on the deck or shooting it or anything like that. But I think he can make the necessary reads.
Yeah, Clingan, just to peel the curtain back, like when the Hawks were tracking toward that late lottery range, he was really prominent on my board that's one of the reasons, because number 1, defensive anchor of the future. And the passing, because especially under Snyder, they have asked their bigs, and Capella it's not his natural tendency. He's got better at this, but like, play some from the elbows, make some reads. Clingan could already do that stuff. He also played, I wonder what you make of this. He also played in this system at UConn that's just beautiful, right? Like, they run great stuff, and his numbers are incredible. Like, you look at his synergy stats, like, his numbers are really, really, really good on offense in a way that I won't say it's surprising to me, but it's like, okay, at first blush, you don't think of him as this awesome offensive prospect, but you look at the numbers, it's like, wow, this is painting a pretty impressive picture. But how much of that is UConn? Like, how much of that is UConn being awesome around him, having shooting everywhere, all that stuff too? Because I think defensively, we could talk about that too. That's a little bit more projectable, and people kind of more agree on the defense. It's like being pretty awesome, and he's obviously the standing reach is massive. Like, he's outlier tools wise, size wise, but offensively, like, that's where I think you kind of tease it out. But if they draft number 1, people are going to be like, this is the number 1 pick offensively at times, which is, I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's more of a functionality versus like a star upside thing potentially.
Yeah, like, I don't know what the offensive role ends up being outside of he's going to be a really good offensive rebounder. He's going to pick and roll, catch lobs, play finish, run in straight lines in transition, all of those things. But like, honestly, like, now he is a couple years younger than Zach Edey. Yeah. But like, if you want a guy that you're going to throw it to in the post and run offense through there, like, Edey's probably shown more as an ability to do that than what Clingan has so far in terms of just straight catching the post and go get a bucket. Again, I don't think that's going to be the role of either of those guys. So at the end of the day, with Clingan, it's just not the upside of Sarr in terms of, I don't know, maybe people behind the scenes, like, I don't have the intel and the communication with people like Sam, quite honestly. So I don't know if people think he's going to shoot, if he's shot well in workouts behind the scenes and those type of things. There's nothing I've seen up to this point. I know, I will be honest. Here's something that frustrates me. I don't like when people use Brook Lopez as a comp for bigs that have never shot to eventually shoot someday. Like, to me, Brook Lopez is the outlier, not the rule. And so I think we can get ourselves in trouble when we go, oh, well, Brook Lopez learned to shoot, so maybe that's something Clingan can do. And then he's why do we think that? And listen, I don't know why Brook Lopez was able to figure it out. If somebody could tell me that, I would love to hear the answer. But I don't have anything right now that says Clingan's going to be able to shoot 35, 36% from three at some point in his career.
That is one of those behind the scenes things that you kind of hear whisper, like, hey, Clingan might be able to shoot it. I'm like, okay, well, I'd love to know. So we are in agreement there 100% about like what that actually might look like. And we don't have to go super deep, but defensively, the question is basically not, is he a good defender and an anchor prospect? It's like, what does the ceiling look like? Because like one of the arguments that I've heard made, and I actually think it might make some sense, is that if you think he's like an all defensive category future prospect, then number one looks a lot more reasonable, right? Sure. Especially in this class. But if he's, I heard a comparison that was actually they were not trying to be a negative comparison, but it was like, what if he's Ivica Zubac? Okay. He's like a really good player. He's a good starting center in the NBA. Yeah. But like, if that guy goes number one overall, your fan base is not going to be happy with that. That's not what matters, but you know what I mean? Like there's degrees here.
It's better than drafting Anthony Bennett though.
Well, no, we agree. And that's the thing. I'm always someone that argues for floor mattering more than people might think it does, especially at non-number one overall pick. But you know how it is. Like number one overall pick is this different category. People get judged differently. And I'm not saying that you have to factor that in, but I guess I'm also asking you, like, what do you think of his defensive production? Because if he's Rudy Gobert, then yeah, it's easier sell.
Yeah. I don't know that he's Gobert, but I mean, I think there's like all defensive upside. And again, like, I don't want anybody to take that as like I'm saying that's what he's going to be.
Upside, not projection.
Yeah.
Upside.
Yeah. If I thought he was all defensive, like that's what he was going to be, I would have him as the number one prospect in this class. Like there's a reason that Alex Sarr is number one on my board and Donovan Clingan is number 6. And, you know, for me, obviously you do your due diligence, right? You scout all of these players, you bring them all in because even if you're not going to draft them this year, you want to have the intel for down the road, right? Whenever they flame out or they're on the trademark or, you know, whatever, you want to have some intel on them. But there's a reason that I have Sarr ahead, and some of it's the offensive upside, but also like defensively, I don't know that there's Clingan's much bigger, just like more physical. I also say like they played him at the level at times at Connecticut, just reading through some of my notes here. And like I thought he held up well. I didn't love seeing him do it, but because I think what people will do, like I'm sure you've had, like, what's the difference between, you know, Donovan Clingan and Zaccharie? Well, the first thing is a couple years. The biggest thing to me, though, is the movement ability. And listen, like Zaccharie has done incredible for himself. He's going to be a first-round pick. I never would have imagined that. So, like, shout out him.
Agreed.
Clingan, to me, I don't care what the combine numbers say. When you watch a game, to me, Clingan definitely moves better than Zaccharie.
Agreed. No, we definitely agree there. And every once in a while, I'll get the outlier people that, in fact, I know I won't even name the outlet. Somebody said it on the air, like right after the lottery, like the Hawks should take Zaccharie. And I'm like, I like Zaccharie. He's a generational college player. I would not be very happy with that if I was a Hawks fan. But no, I like Clingan too. I feels like more in the fan base even, but you know, nationally, he's just constantly, I think Woj mentioned him on a very short list of guys. He was like, I think the Hawks should consider these. And it was like 4 players long and he was one of them. And I was like, okay. And you know, that's probably intel. I don't think Woj is making an analysis of Donovan Clingan.
I would
intel based. Yeah. So I just was intrigued by all of that. He's rising. I generally am wary of the guys who seem to rise during the tournament as a general rule, but he was already there. I also saw him play in the Final Four, both games in person. And it's like, it was what I thought it was going to, I'm not saying it changed my opinion of him, but it was what I thought was going to happen. He looked good to me, you know.
I will say the thing with Clingan that's a little different than others is Clingan came into the year as one of these like lottery level players. And then the injury, the lack of minutes, some of that stuff. And I think what happened was people wanted to see it. Like I referenced it earlier. I wanted to see a big minutes game. Excuse me. You wanted to see, you know, that's the thing with Edie too. Like some games you're like, I can't take anything from this. The biggest player on the other team, 6'8", like
he's doing anything he wants to do.
Yeah, they have no chance. And so watching him against Edie, watching some of the recovery stuff off the ball, like those movements. So I think it was just more getting more data with Donovan Clingan is what helped him throughout the NCAA tournament, as opposed to, oh my gosh, he was incredible. We didn't know it. We're going to weight these games more than we weight other games. It wasn't that as much as for me, I still needed some more data points to work with and figure some things out. Tristan Da Silva is another guy that I don't think he needed the data points. I think he just needed a little bit of the exposure because Cody Williams got all the love for Colorado. And then KJ Simpson was, you know, if you look at the stats, maybe their best player. And Da Silva was incredible in some of those tournament games. And it gave you a chance to watch some more because quite honestly, even for someone like me, I'm trying to watch NBA games every night.
Sure.
And then I'm trying to track players in college basketball, NBL, overseas. And eventually, like I don't want to say they slip through the cracks, but you lose track of them a little bit. And so it's just a refresher, like, oh my gosh, he really does this well or does that well.
All right, that is all for part 1 of this 2-part episode with myself and Bryce Simon. But we do have part 2 coming to you available right now in your podcast feed of choosing. Please subscribe to this podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I also share some content regularly about the Hawks and Braves at patreon.com/BT Rowland. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you for listening as always, everybody, and we'll see you all for part 2 next time.